The air was crisp with winter's chill, a biting cold that seemed to seep into every corner of the small town. The year 1945 was drawing to a close, a year marked by the end of World War II and the beginning of a new era. Christmas Eve had descended upon the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a night for families to gather and celebrate, to share in the warmth and joy of the season. In their modest two-story frame house, nestled on a hillside overlooking the town, George and Jennie Sodder were surrounded by the joyful chaos of their 9 children, each one adding to the festive atmosphere. The younger ones, their eyes bright with anticipation, reveled in the magic of the season, tearing open presents and playing with new toys, while the older siblings savored the warmth of family and tradition, sharing stories and laughter by the fireplace. As darkness fell, the scent of pine needles and roasting chestnuts filled the air, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked cookies and hot cocoa. A comforting backdrop to the lively chatter and laughter that echoed through the house, creating a scene of perfect holiday bliss. A crackling fire roared in the living room fireplace, casting flickering shadows on the walls adorned with festive decorations, each ornament and garland a testament to the family's love for the holiday. Presents, wrapped in colorful paper and tied with ribbons, lay scattered beneath a towering Christmas tree, their shimmering lights reflecting the joy of the season and the hope for the coming year. The tree stood as a beacon of light and happiness, its branches heavy with ornaments and tinsel, a symbol of the family's unity and love. The Sodder children, their faces flushed with excitement, eagerly awaited the arrival of Santa Claus, their imaginations running wild with thoughts of reindeer and sleigh bells. But the festive cheer was soon to be shattered, the warmth of the season extinguished by a terrifying inferno that would change their lives forever. The warmth of the season was extinguished by a terrifying inferno. Around midnight, an eerie silence fell upon the house, the joyous sounds replaced by the crackling of flames. Around midnight, an eerie silence fell upon the house, the joyous sounds replaced by the crackling of flames, a sound that would haunt the family for years to come. A fire, its origin a mystery, had ignited, quickly engulfing the wooden structure in a deadly embrace, turning the family's sanctuary into a death trap. The flames spread with terrifying speed, consuming everything in their path, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Panic surged through the house as the family awoke to the acrid smell of smoke and the horrifying realization that their home had become a raging inferno. George and Jennie scrambled to save their children, their hearts pounding with fear and desperation. Flames danced and leaped, their fiery tongues licking at the walls and ceilings, transforming the once familiar surroundings into a terrifying nightmare. The heat was unbearable, the fire relentless. The air grew thick with smoke, making it difficult to breathe, each breath a struggle against the suffocating fumes. The intense heat scorched everything in its path, reducing cherished memories and possessions to ashes. The festive decorations, once symbols of joy, melted and burned, their cheerful colors morphing into grotesque shapes in the flickering light of the blaze, a stark contrast to the happiness they once represented. The once vibrant and colorful ornaments now twisted and distorted, a haunting reminder of the night's tragic events. The Sodder family's Christmas Eve had turned into a nightmare, one that would leave scars both seen and unseen. Disoriented and terrified, George and Jennie fought to gather their children, their hearts pounding with a primal fear that threatened to consume them. The night had started like any other, but it quickly turned into a nightmare that would haunt them forever. The fire, fueled by the wooden structure and fanned by the wind, seemed to have a life of its own, spreading with terrifying speed. The crackling of the flames grew louder, a sinister symphony that drowned out all other sounds. The once cozy home was now a blazing inferno, its warmth turned deadly. Screams pierced the night, a desperate chorus of terror against the roar of the blaze. Neighbors awoke to the horrifying sounds, rushing out of their homes to witness the tragedy unfolding before their eyes. The air was thick with smoke and fear, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. George, his mind racing, grabbed a bucket of water and flung it onto the flames, hoping to buy precious seconds, but his efforts were futile against the inferno's relentless advance. The water sizzled and evaporated almost instantly, swallowed by the monstrous heat. He knew he had to act fast, but every second felt like an eternity. Realizing the gravity of the situation, George yelled for his children to escape, his voice hoarse with fear and smoke. His shouts were a mix of commands and pleas, a father's desperate attempt to save his family. The urgency in his voice cut through the chaos, a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. He helped Jennie and 4 of their children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., climb out a second-story window onto the roof of the burning house. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke stung their eyes, but they had no choice. They moved quickly, driven by sheer survival instinct. From there, they scrambled down a ladder to the safety of the ground below, their lungs burning, their hearts pounding in their chests. Each step down the ladder felt like a small victory, but the battle was far from over. They could only watch in horror as the fire continued to consume their home. But 5 of the Sodder children remained trapped inside the inferno. Morris, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jennie, 8, and Betty, 5. The realization hit George and Jennie like a physical blow, a gut-wrenching agony that no parent should ever have to endure. Their terrified cries for help echoed through the night, piercing their parents' hearts with unbearable anguish. Each cry was a dagger, a reminder of their helplessness. The sound of their children's voices, usually so full of life, now filled with terror, was almost too much to bear. George, desperate to save his children, tried in vain to re-enter the burning house, but the flames, now a raging torrent, drove him back. The heat was like a wall, impenetrable and merciless. He could feel the skin on his face and arms beginning to blister, but the pain was nothing compared to the torment in his heart. He raced to his coal truck, normally used for his hauling business, hoping to drive it closer to the house and use it as a makeshift ladder. His mind was a whirlwind of plans and desperation, each idea more frantic than the last. He had to do something, anything, to save his children. But the truck, which had always started reliably in the past, refused to budge, its engine mysteriously dead. George pounded on the steering wheel in frustration, his hopes dashed. It was as if the universe itself was conspiring against him, adding insult to injury. As precious minutes ticked by, the fire raged on, its hungry flames consuming everything in their path. The house, once a symbol of safety and love, was now a hellish landscape of destruction. The Sodder family could do nothing but watch, their hearts breaking with every passing second as the flames devoured their home and their hopes. The fire department, a small volunteer unit in the rural town, was slow to respond, hampered by inadequate equipment and the late hour. The town's fire department was not equipped to handle large-scale emergencies, and the volunteers were often called from their homes in the middle of the night, making their response times even slower. By the time they arrived, the Sodder home had been reduced to a smoldering ruin, the flames finally subdued by the cold night air. The once vibrant home, filled with the laughter and joy of children, was now nothing more than a pile of ashes and debris, a stark contrast to the life it once held. George and Jennie, their clothes torn and their faces blackened by soot, stood in the flickering light of the dying fire, their hearts heavy with dread as they searched for any sign of their missing children. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the bitter taste of loss as they called out the names of their children, hoping against hope for a response. But amidst the charred timbers and twisted metal, there was no trace of the 5 children. The silence was deafening, and the absence of their children's voices was a void that could never be filled. No bodies were found, no bones, no remnants of clothing, nothing to indicate that they had perished in the fire. The lack of evidence was both a relief and a torment, leaving the Sodders in a state of limbo, unable to grieve fully or move on. The authorities, assuming the worst, concluded that the intense heat of the fire had incinerated the children's bodies, leaving no trace behind. The official report was brief and final, offering little comfort or explanation to the grieving family. The case was closed, the fire ruled accidental, and the Sodders were left to grapple with their unimaginable loss. The community mourned with them, but as time passed, the tragedy faded from public memory, leaving the Sodders to face their sorrow alone. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the Sodders couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The unanswered questions gnawed at them, and they began to suspect that there was more to the story than they had been told. The official explanation, that their children had been completely consumed by the fire, didn't ring true. They had seen other fires in the community, and they knew that even the most intense blazes left some remains behind. They had burned coal in their fireplace, and they knew that even the hottest coal fire didn't completely incinerate bones. The science didn't add up, and the Sodders began to question the thoroughness of the investigation. Furthermore, they had found various household items in the ashes, some made of material less durable than bone that had survived the inferno. These discoveries only deepened their doubts and fueled their determination to find the truth. The Sodders were haunted by the belief that their 5 children were still alive, somewhere out there, lost and alone. They clung to this hope, even as it brought them more pain, because the alternative was too unbearable to consider. Their grief was compounded by a gnawing uncertainty, a desperate need for answers that seemed to elude them at every turn. They reached out to anyone who would listen, hoping for a clue, a lead, anything that could bring them closer to their children. They couldn't understand how their children could have simply vanished without a trace. The mystery consumed their lives, and they vowed to never stop searching, no matter how long it took or how many obstacles they faced. As the Sodders struggled to come to terms with their loss, strange rumors began to circulate around town. Neighbors, recalling the events of that fateful night, reported seeing unusual activity near the Sodder home. Some claimed to have seen a group of men in a dark sedan parked near the house just before the fire broke out, their faces obscured by the shadows. Others spoke of seeing flickering lights on the mountainside behind the house, as if someone were signaling to the house or observing the inferno from a distance. One particularly chilling account came from a bus driver who claimed to have seen the missing children peering from the window of a passing car on the night of the fire. He described the children as being accompanied by several adults who appeared to be of Italian descent. This detail, coupled with the fact that George Sodder had been openly critical of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini in the past, fueled speculation that the children had been kidnapped. The Sodders, desperate for any shred of hope, clung to these eyewitness accounts, their hearts torn between grief and a flicker of hope that their children might still be alive. They couldn't shake the feeling that someone knew something, that their children's disappearance was more than just a tragic accident. They began to suspect that their children had been abducted, perhaps by someone with a vendetta against George or someone who sought to exploit the children for their own sinister purposes.